Hi everybody. In this video, I want to take a look at the creation of a interior, a teal and white themed design. And we're going to be using D5 render. Now, I'll walk through the steps of sending our model over from SketchUp, adding some decorations, going into D5, setting up materials, setting up lighting and camera, and exporting our final renders. This tutorial or walkthrough will be kind of suitable for anyone who's maybe new to D5 render and would like a fully narrated introduction to the program. If you're looking for additional training resources, I'll link out to my Gumroad courses as well as to my Udemy course, which is about 10 hours of SketchUp and D5 training. But if you're a new beginner and you just want to kind of dabble and kind of take a look at what D5 can do and look at the results, and just have a narrated introduction, this video might be for you. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, everybody, so here we are in SketchUp, and we'll just take a quick look at the build before we bounce over to D5. First thing we'll notice is if we right-click here and go area, looking at about just 400 square feet for this room. Now, bearing in mind, we're only concerning ourselves with how the shot will look, sort of from this angle here, looking at the left, but the impression is supposed to be that the rest of the room is going to be here on our right. Now, since we're not going to show that off, we only have to really concern ourselves with about half of the room, so we're not going to bother really modeling much else. I've placed some windows in here. I've got basically sort of a triptych situation. I've got 3 windows lined up on the wall, and we've got a little bit of baseboard. I'm also using a rug model, and I'm going to preemptively put this into SketchUp. That way, when I drop some D5 assets on there, we know that it will actually kind of fall on the right area. So I think that looks good. All right. With that being said, in order to get your basic SketchUp model over to D5, you'll also need to go to the D5 website and download the D5 converter. Now, this is, to the best of my knowledge, not available yet through the warehouse, so download it from their website with SketchUp off and D5 off, run the installer, and when you fire up SketchUp again, this is what you'll actually get. And in order to send this over to D5, we'll just have to hit the sync button. Okay, let's go ahead and send this basic model to D5. Now, if you're new to D5, you'll notice a couple of things here that are worth looking at. I'm going to turn off clouds here on the right. All right, so the basic interface will look a little bit like this. This is the D5 starting screen. You can see over here on the left, we've got a couple of options for menu. So for example, we can go in here and adjust individual settings. We can also go to our preferences. And here in the preferences, we can do things like turn on some of the more advanced features. These are referred to as widgets. We can also look at autosave, how often we want to basically ask D5 to save our work. And we can also look at some of the keyboard shortcuts. Pretty nice to have. There's a big asset browser that we'll come to later. We also have options for setting up new scenes. And don't worry, we will do this throughout the course of this video. We've got a layer panel on the left with layer visibility and lock abilities. And we also have a list of objects, both imported and default D5 objects. Up at the very top left, you'll see we've got some statistics. It'll tell you how much of your GPU is being used. Now, by default, D5 is not allowed to allocate 100% of resources. I believe this might be a Windows restriction more than anything. And so you might notice that the GPU usage isn't as high as you would like. Now, this will change when you do actually render in D5, but just be aware of that. It might look like it's not using all of your resources, but it will be when it needs to. All right, we've also got VRAM, so virtual RAM on your GPU, and your actual RAM, and a lovely little frames per second counter, so you can be constantly reminded of the fact that you probably need to upgrade your PC. Now, over here on the right, we'll have a lot of settings for environment. There's the default Geo and Sky lighting. You can see if I move this slider, I'm going to change the time of day. Pretty nice. And I can also use the north offset to just change the direction of the sun. Now, don't worry too much about these. We'll go through some of these throughout the course of this video. But just be aware, you also have an option for a HDRI lighting setup as well. And we'll talk about those a little bit more later on in the video. Now, in order to get our content, we should go back to SketchUp. I'm going to turn off the sync camera here. My general recommendation for working with live links or even the Twinmotion Datasmith, for example, is to turn off the auto sync. Now, I'm also using the older D5 converter. There is a newer D5 live link. I haven't tried that yet. I'm going to wait a little bit of time, but the converter itself works really fine. Okay, let's go ahead and just resync. And we're going to pop back over to D5 and look at our scene. Okay, so now that we've gone ahead and sent over our basic SketchUp model to D5, you can see we still have our scale reference right here. That is the new SketchUp 2023 scale reference figure. And here is our build. Okay, the first thing I'll recommend you guys to do is go up here to the top right, click on navigation and change from orbit. You can see keyboard shortcut will be Alt-V and put this to fly. Now, fly will enable the use of the WASD keys and the Q and E keys. So basically the first-person shooter video game kind of controls. Now, this will make navigating in D5, I think, a lot easier for a lot more users. You can always switch back again with Alt-V, but I do think you'll find this keyboard sort of way of interfacing with D5 to be a lot easier. And by the way, you can always adjust the actual speed of the fly too. So if you're working on larger scenes and you need to nip around, it can be really useful to adjust the speed. I'm going to put this back to about 7, sort of between 5 and 7 as a good compromise for interior shots. Okay, there we go. Now, the next thing we can think about doing is setting up a basic scene. Now, this is going to tie closely to camera shots later on, but for our purposes right now, we're just going to have a stored scene so that we can pop back to it. So I'm going to place my camera roughly where I think this will be when we actually render, and I'm going to go to the top left and here and click Create New Scene. Now, you can see if I move my camera way away here, for example, all I have to do is left-click to bounce right back. And you can set up quite a number of scenes here. And very important to note as well, under this little 3 dots above to the right of the scene list title, but above your scene here, is going to be the option for basically environment and effects apply to all. Now, basically, just be mindful of this. If you wanted to set up different lighting and basically same camera shots, for example, but with different lighting environments, you may want to toggle this on or off. That's a little bit of a side note, really. Now that we've got 1 or 2 scenes set up and it's time to bounce kind of into materials. Now, the general recommendation I would have is always to work large to small. And so with that in mind, we're going to apply the larger materials first. So materials and general assets like 3D models will be available in D5 by hitting M on the keyboard or hitting this asset button on the top left. Now, if we drag this guy over here, you'll see that under the online asset browser, and please note the D5 library is entirely online. It's probably a little too vast to really download the whole thing. And I know a lot of users online have been really wanting that, but part of it is just the sheer size and also just ensuring that assets, particularly the pro assets, I think, stay with pro users. There's a desire really to not make it sort of open-ended to everybody. So it is held online. Now, one of the benefits of this, though, is ensuring that really the install for D5 is relatively light and kind of nimble. But anyway, here we go. So you can see we've got models, materials, and particles. And under those overall categories, we've got a lot of subcategories. You can see current standing, which is we're really in sort of November 2023. We've got over 3,000 nature models, 2,000 pieces of furniture, almost 1,000 accessories. The D5 asset library is, along with some of all the rendering capabilities, probably the single best feature of D5. It really does enable you to populate and set dress your scenes really, really quickly. In addition, the models are all really, really good. And particularly when it comes to the decorative models, they're a really high modern character. That is, they look really, really good. They're very clean, and they don't look as dated as some of the other 3D model libraries for other software. All right. In addition, we also have material options. And again, you can see here we've got about 2,000 different materials. Are you going to utilize all 2,000? Probably not, but it's great to have that choice without having to go to a separate third-party library. We also have the abilities to pick certain materials, for example, this blue silicone, and click on the little heart icon, and that will add it to our favorites. Now you can see I have about 37 different favorites right now, and these are really just materials that I use so often. Now, once you favorite these, one of the great features of D5 is that when you do upgrade or update your version of D5, it actually does a good job of transferring your favorite libraries, which I think is a small little thing, but it's really very, very useful. And I've used probably the same 20 or 30 materials in most of my D5 projects and renders. It is worth taking the time to really go through here, and there is a lot to go through, to actually click on different materials and find ones that you think look really, really good, and just go ahead and save them. Now, the updates to D5 have also very, very much cleaned up the material library. There are some sort of interesting naming conventions. That might be a bit of a translation issue as well, but overall, this has been massively updated from the earlier versions, especially D5 version 2.3, and you can see we've got a huge array of different choices. What we're going to do is find a wood flooring material. So I'm going to start with materials first, then get into decoration, and that is kind of the workflow that I prefer. Some people might like to do it differently, but I generally want to work from large to small. All right, so I could go down here to wood, and you can see we've got different options. A lot of these are going to be wood materials specifically for objects. So really what I might need to do is look at wood flooring. And you can see we've got a lot of different options for this. You can go through these and pick and choose different materials, and it's as easy to basically just click on the material. It will download, which will take a second, and drag it out and left click to apply. Now, I'm not obviously going to use this wall material because that would look awful, but I am going to put a favorite wood material on the floor. So I'm going to do this, maybe, let's do the natural. We can toggle sort of between these four little wood materials here. Let's start with just the light solid wood floor number 5, left click and apply it to the floor. And all in all, that looks pretty nice. We may need to make some changes to it. So let's hit X here to get rid of the asset library. If you do that, but you do want to make changes, just hit I on the keyboard. That'll bring up the little eyedropper or sample device, and we can left click on that. And you can see now, here is all the material properties. Now, I don't really need to or want to go through all the material properties, have a discussion about that. This video is primarily intended for new D5 users, but if you've been using 3D programs really for like the last 8 years since PBR became the standard, these are just physically based materials. And so we've got normal maps, specular, and predominantly the roughness slider. D5 does use potentially a specular workflow, but most users will be using the PBR standard roughness workflow. But nevertheless, keep in mind you do have some settings here. Going through these is probably a little bit beyond us for today, but all in all, that looks pretty good. I will, however, go down to the bottom here where we've got a stretch option, and I can left click and drag this to the left or to the right. Now, you can see I'm going to try and find a nice setting, but if this doesn't work, let's hit M on our keyboard, and I'm going to try this Tony antiseptic wood, and I'm going to left click and apply that. Now that looks a lot better. Now it is going, however, the wrong way. So if we go down here to, again, UVs under the stretch tab, we can adjust the rotation. So I'm going to manually just double click here and type in 90 and hit enter, and there we go. Now the wood material is going from left to right, which I think looks a lot better. The next thing we'll want to do is change the wall material. So hit M again, and we're going to bring up the asset browser library. All right, looks great. Materials. I'm just looking for a very neutral white. And so if we scroll on down here, I've got this white wall paint. And again, I've heard of this, and I am under my favorites tab. I'm just going to drag this out, left click to apply, and that should work lovely. This white wall paint is just a perfect generic standard white wall material. Very, very useful because you can always change the color as well. I'm going to scroll up to ordinary light plastic. And again, these will all be available here on the left. You can also use the search bar to search for specific materials, but I've already hearted this, so I'm going to drag this out and apply it to basically the frame for our windows. The last thing I want to do is apply maybe just a generic wood to basically the trim or skirting along the bottom here. So again, there we go. Now, that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with all of these. Okay, now that we've got our basic wall materials and the floor materials set up, okay, let's go ahead and start adding some actual assets to the scene. Now, obviously the scene is not going to look very complete until we do this. So again, let's hit M on the keyboard. I'm going to go to models here. And again, I'm going to go to my favorites. And knowing kind of the overall how I want the scene to look at the end probably helps a little bit. And this is where probably getting reference materials is really going to help. But ultimately, we want a scene that's got a lot of white and uses teal as our accent color. I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to get to where I've got some nice sofa models. And again, these are ones that I've gone through the sort of asset library, and I've just kind of bookmarked the ones that I really, really like. One really cool feature of this, let's go ahead and click on this Italian double sofa. I'm going to drop it straight into my scene. All right. You can see when we do that, if we left click on the object, we have this nice little gizmo, which will allow us to spin. And if we wanted to, we could actually kind of scale this up if we wanted to. Let's again hit V on the keyboard. And by the way, V will toggle between the scale and move gizmo, which can be very useful for positioning objects. We can also hit M, and if we decide perhaps we want a sofa that's a little bit thinner, we can also drag out a different looking sofa. So for example, if I wanted to try something else, all we have to do is left click, and you can see it is downloading the asset. Let's continue to add decorative elements. Again, I'm going to hit M on my keyboard. And in order to find something for the back wall, let's go to Accessories and click on Wall Decorations. And I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, and I'm looking for something that has quite a bit of teal as the primary color. And there we go, Modern Abstract Painting. I'm going to click on this little guy. And I'm going to just place this where I think this will look good. Now, I can always readjust this and kind of mess around with the placement of objects, and I can adjust the scale. But right now, as a placeholder, I do kind of like the look of this. Okay, let's add some more decorative elements. Okay, to add some more objects to our scene, we're going to hit M again. And I'm going to go back to my favorites, but I do strongly recommend that new users really spend a lot of time in the Asset Library, Models, and Accessories tab. This is just one of the best features of an already good program, which is access to a pre-made asset library of some really high-quality decorative assets. You really do have everything that you need in here to make your scenes. And again, the main really cool feature of this, to my mind, is that so many of the decorative elements, not only do they look good, but they are more modern. They are really very, very useful. Now, I'm going to go back to favorites, and I'm going to kind of fill up this dead corner, which is going to be behind my chair. And in order to do that, I'm going to look for a potted plant. And I think this guy will work just fine. Left click, you can see it will load up. Boop. And we're going to go ahead and just pop this into the scene. Now, it's coming in quite large, so what I think I'll do is hit V on the keyboard, and I'm just going to scale this guy down. We want to make sure we're doing this on the central axis, so in other words, scaling universally, not on just a specific axis like the green or red. And I think that looks overall pretty good. If I want to see kind of how this will look from my stored camera, just go back to scene 1. Yeah. And now please just ignore the shadows. This is entirely based on the sun. So I'm going to put that back up to noon, give us effectively a very flat lighting setup. And I'm just going to hit update scene right there. And you can see, there we go, update scene. Lovely. All right, let's continue adding some other objects. Now, in order to add a few more objects, I'm actually going to do something slightly different. We're going to bounce over to Blender really, really quickly. And I'll show you how to bring in objects from an other 3D library, which could be objects in the FBX format, or maybe the Max format, or even just something you found online. Let's pop over to Blender real quick. All right. So here we are in Blender, and I'm using 3.3.1, which is kind of a little bit outdated at this point, but it is, to my mind, kind of fully functional with D5. I've got my default scene set up here, and again, I've actually got a SketchUp scale model as my default scene kind of just useful scale object right there. That's not the normal starting scene in Blender, but I found it very useful to have a scale model, and this is, I believe, from SketchUp Setup. Okay, I am actually going to use a collection of assets from iMesh. All right, let's bounce over to look at the iMesh website real quick. Okay, so if we look here, iMesh is basically a shop, if you will, for really good models. Let's click on the shop button really quickly. Now, I'm not affiliated with iMesh at all. I only started using them because of Greg Miles and Luminous Labs did a video on these iMesh assets, and they really are high-quality assets. They're pre-made for Blender, but I believe you can also download them in other formats as well. You can see here, you got the Blender version. It'll tell you the version, the poly count, and basically some of the other factors, for example, useful for Blender or FBX. Now, to my mind, this is without doubt one of the best asset libraries out there. The models are incredibly high quality. Now, one thing to keep in mind, they are primarily intended for Blender users. They're really designed to just be loaded up into your scene, dropped right in, and rendered in Blender. But we can actually use the D5 converter to get these Blender objects over into D5. So for example, if I was to go over here, and I'm just going to pick on, let me see. This is, by the way, the iMesh. When you sign up for iMesh, one of the options you can download is really just their objects library within Blender. And I'm going to click on decorations, and for example, let's just pick something kind of here. You can see these are all the ones that I've downloaded, and again, really good stuff. Let's just pick on these little candles, and I'm just going to append, hit S, and scale them up. Now, I'm going to delete our scale reference really quickly, and if we need to get this over to basically D5, we can download the D5 Blender converter. Again, this will be available from the D5 website, and you can just install it into Blender. And in order to send these over, all you'd have to do is click Export to D5. Now, one of the benefits of doing this is, and I truly don't understand whatever magic or alchemy is going on behind the scenes, but it does a really fantastic job of getting what are effectively Blender assets right over to D5. Now, one of the real joys of this is once you have an object loaded up, so for example, I'm going to hit M on my keyboard and go to local, and you can see these are all iMesh objects that have been loaded up into D5. It's a really fantastic way to get some really other great assets. And so when you do that, you can always right-click and add these to your own library. All right, let's go through the process really quickly. Here I have a table, and I'm going to click on this. This is, again, an iMesh object, and I'm going to load this and just left-click to bring it into my scene. I'm then, again, just going to make sure I can scale this guy up. And in order to do this, again, you want to make sure you're on the scale. So hit V, and then toggle between up and down. And I think that overall looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the look of this. I'm going to bring this up, hit V, and move this back. Yeah, I think that looks really nice so far. All right, let's add a few more decorative elements, but that's just something I wanted to talk to you guys about. It's how to send over objects from Blender straight over to D5. And I think it opens up just a whole new world of decorative elements. Now, iMesh, again, is they're actually having a Black Friday sale, which right now is actually pretty cool. In terms of pricing, I think it is, I'll click on this really quickly. Yeah, you can see right now, $75 a year. Absolutely one of the best investments I've ever made was actually using this library. Again, I don't know the people at iMesh. I'm not affiliated with them. I just think their stuff is really good. All right, let's go back to D5. You can see I've gone ahead and added a few more decorative elements. We've added some more decoration over here on this storage area, this little table. We've added a nice little wooden table with some newspapers on top right beside the couch. And I've added this sort of small little quirky little seating spot here. Now, we'll probably end up changing the materials on this a little bit, but I think overall we can see our shot is looking a lot better. And it's starting to feel like an actual space. Now, We do want to maybe adjust the color because overall we want the primary colors to be a mixture of white and teal. That's effectively the color scheme we're going for. And so that's something we'll do later on, but we are aware of it. Overall, it's starting to take on a bit more of a finished look. All right, let's add some curtains to the windows. So again, I'm going to hit M and I'm going to go to Model and Favorite. You could also bring in some curtains that you got from maybe the SketchUp warehouse, but I'm just going to grab this Curtain 02 Wind, and I'm going to spin my camera here and just kind of left click and plop it up against the wall. And you can see it is kind of rustling in the wind. Now, we're not really doing any video for this shot, so what we can do is just go over here to the animation tab, and I'm just going to pause that completely. There we go. And you can see the curtain overall is, it's pretty large. We do have some options on the right for the color, effectively the cloth sheer, but really it's just kind of like the color. I also want to adjust this. It's very, very wide, and I kind of want to give a more layered effect. So if I hit V on the keyboard and I left click here, you can kind of see it's scaling everything universally. That's not what I want. So over here on the right, under the basic tab, you can see the size option has a little link icon. I'm going to unlink it, and then I'm going to hold down left click and drag on this red axis, and you can see I'm making it nice and narrow. Hit V on the keyboard and move this guy over here. I do want to make sure I'm not kind of like effectively crashing into anything, and I am going to just rotate this a little bit. Now this is not really going to be fully in the complete shot, so I don't have to worry about putting really sort of any railing up here. I just had to make sure that it kind of looks a little bit feasible. But overall that looks a little bit fine. Needs to be just adjusted a little bit more, but I like the look of this. And I'm going to select this plant and just move it out of the way a little bit. It is in the perfect spot, but I want to make sure it's not crashing with the curtain right now. I'm then going to hold down Shift and move on the red axis to get a nice little duplicate. And I'm going to pull this one off the surface just a little bit more. Now, I'm also going to change the look of this second one to be kind of a darker gray. I think that will work fine. I just want a bit of a visual contrast between the two. That will look pretty nice, especially with our camera down kind of at this angle. We're really not going to see where these overlap very much, but we can always go in here as well and fine-tune them as well if we want to just adjust the scale a little bit more. But that's a simple way of working with curtains, especially ones that won't be animated in D5 at all. Let's talk about color schemes. And for this, we're actually going to bounce out of D5 and we're going to go to a website. And you'll see this is Adobe Color. All right, I'm going to close out my iMesh tab here. Now, Adobe Color, when you first go to the website, and I really do recommend this, I think it's fantastic. You can see we get access to a color wheel with a lot of different options. You can extract themes from images, you can extract gradients, but what I end up kind of recommending my students to do, and what I do a lot, is actually go to, I think it's, Trends, Trends, not Explore. I always get this wrong, although Explore, you can see, gives us a beautiful array of teal, but I like going to the Trends tab, scrolling on down to where the Architecture button is here, and clicking View More. Now, this is when you just can't figure out the color scheme, and you really do want to figure that out before you start working. It's not enough to just build a space. You want to think about the mood and the atmosphere. And so color is the way to do that. This is a beautiful looking shot right over here. Really nice design. I'm going to left click on it. And the really cool thing about this is, look at this. You've got, when you hover your mouse over here, the hex codes for these teal colors. Now I'm going to just click copy here and we'll bounce back to D5. Isn't that just so very, very cool? All right, let's go back to D5. And how can we utilize this? Well, let's change some of the materials. I'm going to zoom in here, hit I, put up the eyedropper, and I'm going to click on this cushion. Okay, you can see we've got options for the base color map and the base color. Over here, again, I'm going to close down the UVs and everything else. Just looking at here on the right, the base color. So again, hit I on the keyboard, click on your object, and you can see you can hover over and select ones. And under the base color, I'm going to make sure when I click on this icon right here, that it's not set to HSV or RGB. I'm going to go to hex. And then what I'm going to do is just double click on the hex code here and do Control V, paste in the hex code that we got from the Adobe Color website, and hit enter. All right, now it might take a minute to update, and you'll notice a couple of things. It's not a perfect match, and that's because of this, the base color map here. So I'm going to click on the icons here, and I may have to go in here and just kind of tweak this. I'm going to take the saturation up, effectively making this a little bit brighter. All right, but effectively, it's a great way to capture the hex value from really the color information from Adobe Color. I think it's really great. Okay, the cool thing about this is we can also click on this, and I want to transfer this material to this cushion. So again, left click on that, go up to the top here, and I'm actually going to go duplicate and apply it to that cushion. Oh yeah, that looks great. Okay, I'm also going to change really just this material right here. This is going to be what looks like almost a suede cloth. I like the material, but not necessarily the color. All right, let's see what we can do with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is hit I on the keyboard. Just make sure I have this object selected. I'm going to hit M on the keyboard as well. You can see I've typed in the word green or color green under the material tab. And so now I'm getting access to pretty much all of the sort of green materials. You can see I got everything that I need there. Now I'm going to go for something that is more teal-like. And so we can start with green and just see. Let's try this green fine grain leather. Just going to left click on that and just see how that looks. Apply it to the object. Now, the problem with that is obviously it is a leather material and I think it's just not looking great. So let's go down. Ooh, and we've got this green velvet. Now, I'm going to drag that out and apply it again. All right, looks pretty nice. And I want to adjust that color again. So I'm going to do I on the keyboard, click on this, and again, go to that base color, change this to hex, and Control V and paste that in. Now again, it's coming in a little bit dark, so I might just lighten this manually, lift this up a little bit, and then go to the base color map, and again, tweak these sliders a little bit more. All right, I think that looks nice. And we won't know until we really kind of go in there. This might be a little, maybe too much of that sort of teal, so maybe we'll just adjust these sliders a little bit more. But what we have is effectively the green velvet material, but with the color changed to teal, and I think that will work quite nicely. You can also change the materials on larger objects as well. I'm going to click on this, hit M on the keyboard, get rid of the green from the search bar, and I'm going to go to fabric. Now I'm going to look for something that's got a nice little pattern, so we can just kind of mess around here and just see what we can find. And maybe this grid fabric. I'm going to drag that and assign it and just see how this looks. Okay, looks nice. We're going to go to the right again, turn off the map options, and looking at the stretch slider, let's crank this up. So I'm going to put this up to about 3 and hit enter, getting a very plaid look, which I'm really not opposed to. And again, hitting I on the keyboard. Let's just go back to the UV mapping options here. I think that looks pretty good. If it does not display correctly or you're having issues with it displaying, we can also turn on triplanar. Basically a more advanced form of projection mapping, and I think that one works a lot better for this object. Yeah, I think we're getting a better result. Triplanar projection mapping is one of D5's other strengths, and it's one that I wish was brought into a lot more rendering programs. It sort of in many ways eliminates the need to UV unwrap your objects, and I think that's really, really very cool. All right. By the way, if you notice every now and then I'm hitting this, this is actually the T key, kind of doing this by accident because of spending a lot of time lately in Twinmotion, but just hit P on the keyboard will bring you back to this perspective view. You can also do this manually by going up to the camera options, and you can see we've got perspective is under P. Now, when would you want to actually look down like this? Well, if you're actually building a scene, or if you're looking to do your renders straight down, maybe perhaps you want to show off a floor plan, or you just need help positioning objects, this is a great way to go about doing that. Again, hit P to go back. All right, now is a really good time to save. Pretty happy with the overall look of what is effectively a very simple D5 scene setup. Now, with that being said, let's do a couple more things. I am going to go bounce back to SketchUp really quickly, and I'm going to just put this back to the default SketchUp style, hit P on the keyboard, and I'm going to just tap Control to do the alternative push-pull, and I'm just going to lift up our ceiling. And so the point of this is really very simple. I just want to have complete control in D5 over the lighting, and I want most of the lighting to come in from the outside. So I am going to just close this out. It is keeping the same wall material, which is basically that generic white wall, and that's absolutely fine. Resync this, go back to D5. You can see now it's looking a lot darker in this scene. That's absolutely fine. One thing I do recommend, though, is to just make sure that your walls in SketchUp have a bit of thickness. You want to avoid light leaking as much as possible, which is where you're kind of getting kind of like strange, kind of light kind of peering through the edges and cracks of the walls. I want to avoid that as much as possible. Also, going to just fix up our curtains a little bit more. This is very low priority, though, the curtains at the moment. Just kind of position these kind of where we think it'll work. Good enough. All right, let's go back to our stored camera. Before we do the lighting, maybe we should set up our camera. Pretty happy with this, so let's go over here, and I'm going to click on the top right of the screen where there's an image button. I click on that. All right, and here we have the camera settings. Now, you can see if we look in the bottom left corner, the mode is just image. I am just doing a regular image. I have options for the field of view and the focal length. Now, as far as I'm aware, effectively changing these is really just going to change both of them at the same time. It might just be put in there just because some people prefer dealing with the FOV and some people prefer focal length. Now, my preference is focal length, generally speaking. So I'm going to start with 35 and just bring my camera back a little bit. Now, there's no true magic number for this. Generally, I found that, exteriors, 15 millimeters is a good starting point, and you can then kind of adjust that all the way up to maybe 25. But for interiors, let's start with 35, and maybe we can drop this down to 33 or 32 maybe. There's no true magic perfect number for this, but just be aware, the focal length will have a profound effect on the overall look of the image, so you want to take your time when setting this up. I'm just going to bounce maybe from 30. Let's see how that looks. All right. That gives us a nice sense of space. I'm going to leave it at 30 for now. I'm going to go back to the top left where my scene 1 is and just hit that little refresh or update scene. Again, that means if I click on, for example, scene 2, and maybe for scene 2, I want a shot closer to this little kind of ottoman here, and I hit refresh as well, you can see now that I can toggle between these guys at any point. And if I change the focal length on this one, maybe for whatever reason we want it to be 11, and I update the scene again, you can see now the focal length is tied to each scene. So that's pretty nice. Gives you an awful lot of control. All right. You can see also as I bounce around, there's a slight sort of slow delay in updating the actual scene. In other words, basically D5 is, rendering in real time because it was a real-time path tracing render engine, technically built on the foundations of the Unreal Engine 5? Yeah, UE5. And so you can see here, when I do that, there's a little bit of kind of a splotchy effect that will work fine. Part of this is really due to just GPU. I'm running a stock 3070, and the results for me are like, okay. Running it at work on a 3090 or above, the results will be a lot smoother. So when it comes to working with D5, the GPU really does matter. This is looking nice. Aspect ratio, I'm going to just leave this sort of as is. I like this aspect ratio. If I was to click on this, you can see we get these kind of dark shaded bars on the side, and that will tell you exactly what the ratio is. I'm going to keep this, effectively this 16:9, and my preset size will be basically the resolution of my output. Strongly recommend that you go beyond the 4K at this point, 6:8. Don't really know why you'd need 16 right now, but there you go. But at least 6 or 8, that will give you an incredibly high fidelity image that you can work with then further in Photoshop. But, 2K at this point for anything other than video is a bit ridiculous. I really think 4 is the minimum that you want to be presenting at the moment. Really, honestly, 6 is probably better. All right, looks good. Pretty happy with that with scene 1. All right, I can X out now of my stored camera and safe in the knowledge that that's set up and nice and ready to go. So we mentioned at the very start that you've got kind of two ways to light your scene in D5. Using the default Geo and Sky will enable you to spin and rotate a sort of pseudo or fake sun. If I move my camera outside here, you can kind of see the effect of that's happening. There's our nice little sunlight. That's effectively the Geo and Sky part of the sky. It's going to be the sky. And you can see we can adjust the north offset, which if I spin my camera again, and just kind of move this around, you can kind of see what's happening. It's moving effectively the north point. This would give you a huge amount of control if you were trying to do a render with a specific lighting at a specific time of day and a specific angle, which, personally I've never done, but some people might. You can also adjust the overall time of day, which will affect really sort of the grading, if you will, of the light. So, for example, at noon, you're getting this perfectly balanced light. But if I move this to the morning or evening time, you can kind of see we're getting a lot more oranges in there. The sweet spot for me for a shot like this, if you're using the Geo and Sky, you kind of don't want it to be like pointing straight down from right up above, unless you're trying to light the scene entirely with just by default ambient light, which isn't, I don't think, the best approach. You can see, though, it is kind of flat. My own personal preference is to have actually light coming in from a specific angle like this. Now, please note, this is personal choice. I have read, sort of some stuff from interior photographers who primarily deal with, setting up shots for really houses for sale, who would argue that you don't want specific shadows. You want flat, neutral light. So it might just come down to personal preference, and really might just come down to, does it look good at the end of the day? Now, if we expand on this tab here, you can see we have controls in addition for not just the overall light. We can increase the sunlight intensity, acting as a multiplier. So this will effectively, going from, 0, whatever, all the way up to 2, which will increase the strength of the light. And we also have the sun disk radius that a lot of people forget about. Higher the sun disk radius, the softer those shadows are going to be. Not very noticeable, I think, on a shot like this, but if you have grass, I think you'll really quite notice this. Do you want hard shadows or soft shadows? That's really what it comes down to. All right. We can also light our scene with a high definition range image or HDRI sky. Best results if I pop out here, a low scale figure, and I change from the drop-down menu here, early morning. I put this to, for example, cloudy. There we go. You can kind of see what we've got going on. And if I put this back to midday, you can see again the same results as well. Please note, D5 ships with a whole bunch of different HDRIs as standard. Only some of them will probably be used a lot of the time, and some you'll probably never use. But one of the really cool features about this is we can actually, using the drop-down here, where it says default, go to custom, and you can load up your own HDRI. Now, a lot of these will come from the website Polyhaven. Please note that D5 only shows the viewport HDRI at a resolution of about 2K, but it will export at whatever the highest resolution you have. So for example, you can see hilly terrain 01 8K. If I click on that to load it up, in the viewport, it's going to look pretty low res, but when you actually render it, it should pop out at 8K, which will be really nice. All right, going back to scene 1, I am going to turn on the HDRI. And I'm actually going to look for, I have some loaded up here under the custom. This Kloppenheim 07, it's effectively almost a very white render. There's really nothing going on here. I think it's in about, if memory serves, I think 8K. And you can see then, if I look outside, not much going on, very white. There's a little bit of color, but overall, it's a very neutral HDRI sky, and that can work quite nicely. Go back to my stored scene here, HDRI. Please note that when you bounce over to the stored scene, you'll actually lose the environment unless you hit the refresh button or update scene on the left. So again, I'm going to go HDRI, Kloppenheim 07, which is pretty fine, I think. And I can adjust the light, so basically how bright that HDRI is. And I'm going to put it to pretty bright because I'm doing an interior shot. I want as much light coming in from the outside as possible. And I can also rotate this to get a little bit of that sun, which will be the brightest spot. We also have options for adjusting the color temperature. Take this to the left to make it warmer, and take it to the right to make it cooler. Lastly, D5, the actual makers of D5, have also provided quite a number of kind of HDRI scenes in various places on their website. You can download other users' work. Let me go back to default here, and I'm going to look for what is going to be something with just a little bit more pop. Let's grab this sunrise here. And this might give me a better example of the color temperature slider going to the left and going to the right. A lot more noticeable when you're actually outside. And you can also, again, rotate this sky. Now, there's no magic way to light these scenes in D5. For an interior shot, you are probably going to have to add extra artificial lights, even if we've got a pretty nice HDRI setup. So, for example, I will go back to my custom tab here. And you can see at the top, I've got a generic white one. I'm going to click on this guy. This is just a perfectly neutral white HDRI. I am going to hit refresh over on scene 1 or update scene. Make sure that's there. And resync. I can adjust the light of this. So again, I can take this up or down. And I go for pretty high value. And rotating this one isn't really going to make a huge difference because quite simply, it's just that. It's just a very, very just completely white sky. All right. Looks good. Go back to scene 1. And now, in order to add a bit of supplementary light, we can turn on the artificial sun here, which will mimic the Geo and Sky sun, and I could crank that up as high as possible. It'll only make a difference, though, if your HDRI really has a sun, and this one doesn't. So I need more light coming in from outside. So what can I do? Well, I can add an actual light. So let's go outside here really quickly, and you can see it'll take a moment for the camera to adjust. I'm going to go to the top and see where it says Add Lights right up there. I'm going to click on Add Light, and I'm going to pick a rectangular light, number 4, or hit 4 on the keyboard. I'm going to place this on the ground right here, and you can see, there it is. There's my light. Now, this can be a little hard to envision, especially when it comes to placing this. So I'm going to spin my camera, place it somewhere central. I think that looks okay. And then what I'm going to do is go to the color option. You can see all my little settings for my lights are here on the right. And click on color, and I'm going to change this bright red. And this will enable me to see this a lot easier. I'm going to rotate this light, spin it, so it's actually casting red light. And looking at it from the side, it's pretty far away from the window. So let's move this on that yellow. And you can see, again, not getting a huge amount of result. Why? Well, the intensity. Let's crank that up to 100. And let's make sure that this is actually working the way we want it to work. We do have to check that our window material is set to glass. And hit I on the keyboard. And if I click on this, it's set to just this generic gray. So let's hit M on the keyboard, go to material. And again, I'm going to go to my favorites. And I'm looking for glass, normal glass, and apply that there. All right, how's that looking? Pretty good. You can see the HDRI light is coming in to the actual room now. And I think, there we go, looking lovely. And we've got some light coming in from that aerial light. Now, we need to adjust the area light a little bit more and make sure that this is, in fact, working the way we want it to work. So, there we go. It's actually looking the wrong way. So let's Control-Z the movement, and I need to rotate this guy. Again, looking down, spin it here. 180 degrees. And yeah, you can see now there's that red glow. Now, it does seem pretty weak at the moment. So we need to change a couple of things here. Now, the intensity is set to 300, but the light itself is pretty small. Let's go to the size option just above the intensity there. I'm going to type in 3000 on the X and about 3000 on the Y. Now that's going to make this light a lot bigger. And you can see it is actually blasting that kind of red light right onto the wall. And because we've changed that glass material, light is coming through properly. All right, brilliant. Now, going back to our stored scene, there we go. There's that extra red light coming in. It looks really nice. We will obviously change that back to white, but it's just nice to know that we're getting some extra light from outside. The next thing we can do is adjust the attenuation radius. If I put it to 0, the light is going basically no distance. And you can see all the red is slowly dissipating from the shot. But if I crank it all the way to the right, that white light is going to shoot all the way. It's a distance. I'm not really sure what this value equates to in real world terms. But setting it as far as possible, you can see now we're actually shooting that white light all the way into the scene. In order to better mimic real-world lighting, what we can do is lift this up just a little bit and rotate it down slightly. Because obviously the brightest point will be the sun, and so we're trying to mimic basically additional lighting coming in. Move it a little bit to the left and fine-tune this to your heart's content. But overall, I think that will look pretty good. Let's do a Control S and save. And what I'm going to do now is change this light back. Please note you can also change the temperature and just leave this to 6500 if you're just looking for very neutral light. Although I prefer to change this color to actually just back to white. All right. That looks pretty good. Pretty happy with the overall look of this scene. I did add one more area light, the same number light. That's going to be number 4. It's a rectangular light. Area light is the twin motion term, but it's basically a big square light. Now, that is actually facing this way. And I did this basically just to add a little bit more light to the shot. It's at a very low intensity, something like 30, but it's just going to lighten up some of the shadow areas as well. Other than that, that's it. That's a very simple beginner's lighting setup, using a pretty white area light or HDRI light outside, and then adding 1 or 2 area lights inside. You can get a lot more involved if you wanted. Maybe you could add another light over here, casting some orange or warmer light into the shot. But overall, I kind of just like the look of this. Again, white and teal is really what we're going for. All right, let's move on. So if we're happy with our environment settings, we can then click on Effects. Now, I'm going to just add another scene here. Let's go up here and just click one more here. There we go. Now, well, in this case, we've got multiples. If that happens, just right-click and delete. All right. So we've got scene 2 was here, the one we used when we talked about actually having the different focal lengths. I will probably keep this, but I'll probably do something a lot better, hopefully, than this. But overall, scene 3. I'm just doing this so I have effectively a safety scene, so I can make changes to scene 3 without really it affecting scene 1. All right. So what we can do is look under the Effects tab. I'm going to minimize these and just run through them really quickly. The first is the use of a LUT or lookup table. Now, this is, I would consider more of an advanced thing. LUT or lookup table is basically a way to color code your image. Now, the exact mechanics of it is kind of beyond me. It's used in Photoshop. You can use them really as part of post-production, or you can just use them preemptively here. There's a gazillion of these online that you can find and download. Some are good, some are medium, and some are going to be terrible. But, D5 comes with a handful, including these ones here that you'll see, the modern dystopian, and the day, night, and vibrance, and saturation. And so you can kind of mess around with these a little bit. Now, my personal preference is not using these. I prefer to do this in post-production in Photoshop. But doing post-production on video using LUTs might be a little bit more challenging. So maybe you just want to have the look ready. So oftentimes people will use the modern dystopian one, and I think what it does is effectively really kind of darken those shadows. And you can adjust the intensity here, and you can see it just makes the image just look a little bit like more moody, more atmospheric. There you go. I'm going to turn these off. And if we click on the post-processing, the really important one is this, the exposure. Now, by default, D5 will find the exposure for you. Does a pretty good job. I think it's sort of a balancing between the outside and inside. Honestly, though, this is the single biggest sort of beginner issue, is not turning this off and not manually adjusting exposure. Now, exposure is effectively how much light is going to be going through the camera lens, at least from a photography point of view. In this, it's just the overall brightness. And so there's, again, no real magic number here. You just have to look at your image critically, hope that you've got a good, well-calibrated monitor, and kind of see the effect you're going for. I have found, though, D5 versions 2.4 and I think 2.5, because of the sort of improved global illumination, the scenes tend to be overly bright, and the exposure tends by default to be overly bright as well. Generally, you're probably going to be darkening this quite a bit. And again, there's no magic figure. I'm putting mine to negative, what is that? 0.41, but it could be different for you. So you just got to get critical about eyeballing it. We also have options for contrast, but again, my suggestion, maybe just let's leave that for Photoshop. We can adjust the highlights, which is going to be the brightest. Oftentimes the whiter parts of the image will be the brightest. I do like adjusting this, and I am going to take that one up. Again, you could do this in Photoshop. Shadows, my preference is generally leave here, and then the slope is sort of the mid-tones. 0.8 is just a fine balance. Again, we're going for a very beginner-friendly render here. All right, we can adjust the overall white balance. Blue tends to be cooler, and to the right, the oranges tend to be warmer. Now, I'm going to go for a slightly bluer image here, so I'm just going to move this very softly to the left. You don't want to go too much with this. Tint, best left alone. Bloom is going to be effectively, if you look at the window in the top left corner there, no bloom, lot of bloom. Can look really cool, can also really mess up the image, but can also give it a kind of a dreamy quality. So it just depends on what you're going for. But technically a low value is more accurate because you've got brighter areas outside. Lens flare, we're going to leave alone. Vignette, we'll add a darkening to the edges. You can see like that. Can look pretty nice. Let's put a little dash on there just for fun. Chromatic aberration, we're going to leave, and saturation, we're going to leave. All right, I'm going to, again, just hit refresh here, update the scene, and I think that looks pretty good. Now, we'll give it a break for a minute, and then you want to come back and look critically at your work. Even for, people who've been doing ArcViz or 3D work for a while, one of the best things you can do is literally get up, take a break, and come back a little bit later and take a look at your work and look at it with fresh eyes and really look at it critically. All right, we'll be right back. All right, everybody, getting close to wrapping this up. Made a few tweaks to our HDRI sky after taking a bit of a break. Just sort of went in here and increased the light overall. Did experiment with turning on the extra sun and having some more light coming through the windows. But overall, I think I'm pretty happy with just the ambient lighting. Now, to finish this up, let's go to image. Again, I'm on scene 1, liking the camera placement, liking where everything is at. I think this looks good. Presets, it is set to 6K. Aspect ratio, I do like the look of this, where things are located. And I like the overall focal length. I have a couple of other options that are oddly kind of hidden away here. If we go up to camera, right here at the top right of the screen, I am going to turn on 2-point perspective, and that will straighten the lines of the camera. Gets rid of some of the effectively kind of the distortion that comes with really working in 3D work. Now, I'm also going to tilt my camera a little bit. I do want to make sure that everything is lined up nicely. In order to sometimes better see this, it can be helpful to turn on effectively a visual grid. So under display here, I'm going to turn on grid, and this will give you kind of an idea of how to line up your shots a little bit. I'm going to go up to my camera setting and just reduce the speed of the fly to quite low. And there we go. I think that's a more balanced shot. We are getting a bit more of the light coming in, and overall, we're seeing a lot more of really just everything is in shot and in focus a little bit more. Now, I can leave this, or I can start moving the camera a little bit to the right. You're really trying to get these action lines to kind of line up in a nice, visually appealing manner where everything is sort of framed nicely. I'm kind of okay with this. It's not perfectly right, but I am seeing a bit more of the decorative elements on the right, and I don't really want to get all of the really that bloom coming in from the window. It just seems a little bit too bright. So maybe we'll just kind of break some of the rules here just a little bit just to get that to work. Okay, I think that looks a lot nicer. It's not perfectly balanced as images go, but I think it will work just fine. Okay, hit update scene on the camera there on the scene 1, and that'll lock that camera in. Now, we can also go in and turn on depth of field. I'm going to just turn this on, set focus, and I'm going to click on the chair. Now, depth of field is a visual sort of post effect. We'll slow things down just a little bit, but you can also then adjust the actual strength of your depth of field as well. Now, if you prefer doing this in Photoshop, by all means, I'm going to put a little bit. I think a little goes a long way. I think depth of field is one of those really cool things that people tend to go a little bit pronounced on, and I'm absolutely guilty of that myself. Again, go up to refresh, and then once you're pretty happy, the last thing to do, if you're a D5 Pro user, you can, I believe, under the Widgets tab, so again, that'll be under Preferences and Widgets, go down to Channels and turn these on. Now, we don't need a sky mask. We don't need to isolate our sky because we don't actually have one. The ambient occlusion, this can be set manually, or I'll just let D5 figure it out. And everything else, Z depth, I'm going to turn off because we're not really going to do any depth of field work with this. And transparency, I'm going to turn those off. But it'll give us an AO, a material ID, and a reflection layer. And once you're happy with that, let's go ahead and click the giant render button. I'll see you when this image is done. Got all of my render passes set up in layers. And I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. Again, this is just an absolute beginner's guide for how to render in D5. And so we'll just do a quick basic kind of run through in Photoshop. All right, first thing I want to do is move the ambient occlusion or AO layer to the top of the stack. And I'm going to go ahead and change the blend mode here. And we can try different blend modes and just see what works best for us. Keeping in mind, we do want this to be kind of a bright image. And so we don't want it to be like very dark or moody. We're not really going for that. And so we can see here, I'm going to put this on soft light and drop the opacity quite low. Just want to get a little bit of that shadow back in. Okay, it looks lovely. And I'm going to go to the reflection layer and bring this to the top of the stack. And this one, I'm going to change the blend mode here to lighten or screen. And I think screen will work well for our purposes. A little bright. Again, drop that opacity down. There we go, about 40–50%. Cool. I'm then going to hold down Shift, select all three layers, right-click, and duplicate these layers. Just say OK. We don't need to necessarily name them or anything. And then once I've got my duplicates, I'm going to right-click and go Merge Layers. And that will merge all of my layers. Now, I'm just going to turn off the visibility on the others. I'm not too pushed about these at all. And just I'm kind of noticing just we have a little bit of an issue here with some of the texture map not quite working on this object. So that's something that I think you'd want to go ahead and fix. And other than that, though, I think overall things are looking pretty fine. So I'm going to now duplicate again this merged group. And that looks good. And I'm going to double click on the name here and just type BKG. And that just means background. All right, looks good. And we're going to go filter, camera raw filter. And here we are in camera raw. Now, depending on your version of Photoshop, this will look kind of like this, or it might look slightly different. Kind of depends on which version of Photoshop you're working with. We can, if we want to fast track, we can go to Profile, and we can go Browse, and we could, for example, pick maybe Modern 8 or Modern 9. Just kind of depends on what you're wanting here. Modern 8's a good starting point, and I use both of these, like 7, 8, and 9. I'll use these quite a lot. Actually, they're a good starting point. Another option is to use the pre-built adjustments. Now, these come with Photoshop, and there's actually quite a lot that come with the newer versions of Photoshop. You can also, in addition, find plenty of these online, and you can download them from a variety of different sources. And you can see it's a really fast, efficient way to kind of pick a look or to find an overall color depiction that you really do like. All right. We're, however, going to bounce over to the default tabs. I'm going to bring up the exposure tab a little bit here, and generally, you want to have control over this in Photoshop. We can adjust the highlights as well, which will kind of bring back some of the brighter values. And you can see on the top, the histogram will actually show you really the range of the image, the lights, midtones, and the highlights. I'm going to adjust the shadows a little bit here. Gonna maybe lift these up. And you can see if we adjust the white slider, it is going to either brighten or kind of darken the overall whites in our image. I'm going to actually generally take this back a little bit to the left, as the whites tend to be a little bit overexposed. Now, we can also adjust the blacks, and if we take this to the left or to the right, you can kind of see the effect that it's actually going to have. Now, blacks, we don't really have a huge amount of like blacks in the image, so I don't really need to darken this too much. We can lighten it up a little bit, which will brighten up some of those areas. And I'm just going to pretend that this little black spot right here where the texture didn't show up, just pretend that that's, working fine. All right. Color, not really going to mess with these. I do generally like cranking the vibrance, which, as far as I know, is a much more smarter, better version of saturation. So I'm going to move this up a little bit, make all those colors look really nice. And I'll bring the saturation down ever so slightly. So kind of like if you crank this, you can really see what I'm doing. Leaving the saturation at 0, I've made kind of each of the colors just kind of pop more with the vibrance at 100. But if we bring this back down to a more reasonable amount and then reduce the saturation, I think you get a better result. So more vibrance, less saturation. Make those colors pop. Effects, texture, clarity, all of these. I'm not going to massively run through these. I will zoom through the image just a little bit, looking at this cushion in terms of texture values. I'm going to add a little bit of texture and just a little bit of clarity. Now, my understanding is clarity is going to be slightly sharper. Again, probably a better way to do this than just cranking the texture. The dehaze and vignettes I'll leave. Zoom back out. Add a little bit of grain to make it look a little bit more photographic, basically adding in some imperfections. And I'm going to look at this on the curve, try and get maybe an S-curve effect going on. So with the highlights, what I can do is just kind of add a little bit of that. And then the shadows, just darken it a little bit more. And you can see we formed kind of an S-curve. Very soft one there. Looks good. Okay. Color mixture. Now, this is going to really be done on a per image basis. I've got no magic figures or sliders to set this to. I am going to increase the saturation on the greens because I think some of the plants have kind of gotten a little bit washed out. And I'm going to increase the brightness there. Now, the aquas and blues, again, that teals, let's really saturate these a bit more. You can see if I strip them out, it diminishes it. And so I'm going to grab these and move it a little bit there. And I can overall tweak this a little bit more. There we go. Just bring these aquas a little bit more to the green. I think that works just fine. After that, I'm going to ignore color grading. I don't ever actually really use color grading. Detail, a little bit more sharpening. It never goes astray. And I think everything else looks pretty fine. I think I'm quite happy with that. We can add, no, I think actually, I think we're in a pretty good spot. Defringe, you can add chromatic aberration, but we're going to do that in a separate slider. But overall, I think I'm pretty happy with the look and feel of this. Let's click OK. I'm going to duplicate this fellow one more time, and I am going to go up to Filter, Other, and we'll do a high pass. And yeah, that looks pretty good. And we'll change the blend mode here of this to overlay. And that's just kind of an older trick, but I think it works pretty nice. There we go. You can see that pop really on the cushion. Looks good. Right click, merge that fella down. And then we're going to duplicate the background one more time. And we're going to go Filter and Lens Correction. Now you can do this in Camera Raw, but I'm just going to do it the way I learned to do it. And there we go. And zoom in a little bit. Go to Custom. We can add a little dash of distortion if you want to make, you can kind of see if we take this all the way to the left, it's really going to make the image like bounce out. But just -1 looks good. Kind of just adds a little bit of a camera effect to this. And in terms of the fringes, normally I'll just kind of pick an arbitrary value kind of here. I'm going to add a little bit of the red cyan fringe in. It's probably going to be a little hard for you guys to see. You're almost just adding in imperfections. Click OK. Zoom out, and there we go. With that being said, I think we're pretty much done. You could fine-tune this to your heart's content in Photoshop and make some changes, but overall, I really like the look of this. I think we'll go ahead and call it there for today. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. Hopefully you've found this to be useful, especially for you new D5 users. If you're just starting, I think you'll really fall in love with D5 pretty quickly. It's a fantastic rendering software. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for today. See you in the next video. Cheers.